Russia is starting the process of mass resettlement of residents from the temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories, Ukraine Center of National Resistance, CNS, has reported. The resettlement of Ukrainian residents is part of the Siberia Development Program, for which Russia will allocate 700 billion rubles. The agency reports that Russians have already begun sending letters to the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, demanding that local authorities identify workers for long-term assignments to the Far East region. Such notices were sent to schools, hospitals, and public utility enterprises. They are forcing them to include people not burdened by family circumstances in the lists, meaning the most vulnerable individuals, those who can be deported quietly, the Center of National Resistance noted. The CNS emphasized that this is a repetition of Soviet-era practices of organized labor mobilizations, which were once used to deport Crimean Tatars, Ukrainians, Chechens, and other peoples. Siberia has been emptied, and Russians do not want to move there, so the Kremlin is preparing to build its new empire with the hands of Ukrainians torn from their homes, the statement says. In October, the CNS reported that in captured territories of Ukraine, Russian occupation administrations had significantly intensified filtration measures, expanding mass inspections with the goal of forcibly issuing Russian passports to local population. People without a Russian passport face deportation, confiscation of property, or the blocking of payments. The goal is obvious: to drive out outsiders and leave only the loyal ones, the center's message says. It should be noted that the International Committee of the Red Cross, to improve the application of norms, had recently updated its commentary on the Fourth Geneva Convention on the Protection of Civilians during War.
The Crimean bridge needs to be destroyed, but all initial assumptions about it being an unreliable structure and easily destroyed have proven unfounded. Military expert and former SBU officer Ivan Stupak explained this in a Glavred chat. He noted that the SBU had attacked it several times, but it stood its ground, did not fall section by section like dominoes, and did not collapse. How many hundreds of millions of dollars? How many tens of thousands of hours of work would it take to damage this bridge? It doesn't play a key role now, because a road and railway have already been built in the occupied territories. Yes, a strike on the bridge would be symbolic and important, but the question is how much and what would we spend, and how much of what we would gain in return, the expert says. Stupak also spoke about strikes on targets in Moscow. According to him, we would like to see flights to the Kremlin, but we know how protected Moscow is, and the Kremlin in particular. He emphasized that a map of Moscow's air defenses can be found online. Everything is covered by 3 layers of air defense. Breaking through will be extremely difficult, but possible. However, Russians only respect one book, the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation. Even if drones explode overhead and all the glass cladding in Moscow City crumbles, they won't say anything. They won't protest. That's because their favorite book contains an article against discrediting the Russian armed forces, spreading fake news, and so on. No one wants to go to jail, so none of this will have much of an impact on Moscow, the expert notes. In his opinion, it would be wonderful to cut off power to Moscow, as this would temporarily deprive government authorities of communications and create enormous inconvenience in the city. But this is difficult to achieve. Military analyst, war veteran and retired Ukrainian Armed Forces Major Oleksiy Getman believes Ukraine should target the Kremlin and Ostankino because they are decision-making centers and military installations. He notes that to exert emotional pressure on Russian society, it is necessary to strike large cities, or more precisely, the military installations located in them, as well as significant locations. I don't think a strike on the Kremlin and its destruction would have had much military significance, but a strike on the Kremlin and Lenin's mausoleum would certainly have an impact on Russians, as it would have been discussed throughout Russia. As it is, we've destroyed almost half of the country's oil refineries, but Russians don't care. Something's burning and blazing somewhere, and there's almost no talk about it within Russia. But if Ostankino had fallen, or a missile had hit a street in Moscow, Russians would have talked a lot about it. And most importantly, they would have started asking Putin questions. After all, Putin, like any dictator, is afraid to show weakness. The harsher a leader treats the people in Russia, the more they love him. Putin is a maniac and a sadist, but for some reason it's precisely such people that are loved in Russia and are ready to kiss their boots. But at the slightest sign of weakness, Russians immediately tear him down. In Russia, cruel people are loved because if he beats you, it means he loves you, the analyst says. Russian forces are reportedly resorting to obsolete 1970s-era Soviet missiles for critical air defense systems, signaling a severe depletion of modern ammunition stockpiles. Military expert Alexander Kovalenko discussed the issue on his Telegram channel. According to him, a recent Russian propaganda segment inadvertently exposed a critical vulnerability in Moscow's short-range air defense capabilities. The report, which intended to glorify the crew of an OSA air defense system from the 74th Motorized Rifle Brigade, instead showed the missile system armed with unrecognized munitions. Kovalenko identified these not as the standard upgraded 9M33M3 missiles, but as the original 9M33 variant, a model first produced in 1971. The expert asserts that the only logical reason for deploying these antiquated missiles is the total depletion of modern 9M33M3 stockpiles. This development comes despite assurances from Russia's Kalashnikov concern in 2023 that it was actively ramping up production of the modern missiles and opening new workshops to ensure the sky would be covered. Kovalenko noted that in reality, it appears Russian forces are now being forced to pull Soviet 9M33s from dusty basements. He argued that this ammo shortage for the OSA system, a problem Ukraine has already faced and adapted to, signals a growing weakness. As Russia begins to exhaust this component of its air defense, Kovalenko concluded, for the Russian sky, it will get worse and there will be more holes. In these circumstances, even Moscow is defenseless. In recent months, Ukraine has increased the number of strikes using homemade drones against Russian critical infrastructure essential to powering Russia's war machine. Faced with attacks using dozens of drones at once, the Russians' air defense proved to be overstretched and not always effective. Despite Russia's extensive air defense capabilities, there are limitations to protecting all targets effectively. Matthias Eken, a defense and security expert at RAND Europe, told, if Ukraine maintains pressure on Russian industrial and military sites and potential targets, this is going to have a significant consequence on how Russia fights, said Samuel Bendet, a senior fellow at the Center for a New American Security think tank, adding that Ukraine resorts to combined long-range attacks using various types of drones. With the beginning of the full-scale invasion, drones became a game-changer for Ukraine. The Ukrainian government began investing more in domestic production, creating incentives and grants, and simplifying bureaucratic procedures for manufacturers. As Ukraine increases its drone production, Russian air defense is increasingly showing its vulnerability. Recent Ukrainian targets have included oil refineries, airfields, weapons and ammunition depots. With dozens of drones entering vast Russian territory overnight, Russian air defense cannot cover it all.